A lot of times people will say, how can I help? And I think that is the least helpful question, because if people already knew, they'd probably ask you. And if they say, well, I need 4 weeks off and you can't do that, all of a sudden you've also dug yourself into a hole.
Hey, I'm Nick Armstrong, and this is the Founded in FoCo podcast. Every episode, we get a chance to talk to an innovative mover and shaker in our community doing cool and creative things. And today we've got Katie Huey. Katie, welcome to the show.
Hi, thanks so much for having me.
Tell us about what you do. Tell us about your business.
Yeah, absolutely. So I am really driven by the intersection of humans and businesses, and where are organizations helping people thrive. I also am really passionate about the things that people prefer not to talk about, which sounds intriguing and perhaps interesting, but I like really digging with people under the surface to figure out what makes them tick, where are they getting stuck, and then what are our opportunities in suffering. Even saying that, people look at me like, I'd prefer to look at that tangentially, or like, I can maybe see it from over here. But I feel like I'm very gifted at holding space and creating experiences where people can say, wow, me too. I thought I was just alone in this. So I'm continuing to navigate and figure out who I want to be when I grow up, but very driven by a curiosity of how are we helping people be whole in the environments that we choose to be in, and where are we getting support as we navigate transition. So I do that through coaching, through writing and facilitation of workshops. And I also like to partner with people as they're figuring out where could I perhaps serve those and care for those that I steward in better ways.
This is a topic near and dear to our hearts in Founded in FoCo. We love the mental health track that was started in, I think it's 2018, through the Brain Crawl. And we as solopreneurs, freelancers, small business owners have a hard time addressing nitty-gritty topics. And as you said, really celebrating the whole person up to and including grief. And so talk to me about what strategies do you employ for small business versus maybe somebody like a freelancer solopreneur who needs to address those spaces, and how would you bring those elements in for those different types of organizations and sizes of businesses?
Yeah, I think the keyword that stands out to me is this idea of integration. Grief is a big word with lots of different stickies to it. We all have different conceptions and understandings and comfort levels of what that means to us. And I think grief is a very individualized, lived experience. So coming at the work with like, you need to do these 3 things in order to get over it, really is a formula for failure. So my number one piece of advice is actually, how are you finding comfort? Before we can start to even embrace this idea of moving through or getting over, which personally, I don't think you actually really do. It's how are we finding comfort to face what is, and then where can we integrate our new realities? Anytime there's a loss, there's a gap between what we thought would be and what actually is. And in that gap is a space for compassion. And so I'm really inspired to help people first take the shame out of grief experiences. There's a lot of shoulds in grief. And then turn toward comfort as we look at what are we actually dealing with? What are the implications of this choice? Sometimes it's inside of our control, and sometimes grief happens to us. I also really believe that this is lifelong work. So you get to choose. And sometimes when somebody told me that, when I first had my intro to grief back in 2016, I was like, are you kidding me? I don't want this to be lifelong work. But I think in that truth, there's different ways for us to live into how much do we want this to be present? And then what do we do accordingly? I would argue that all of us have gone through a pretty collective grief experience over the last 4 years. So there's some level of it, whether you're an individual or an organization. And I can talk about the bereavement multiplier, which is pretty fascinating. So there's a number that for every person who has passed, 9 people are intimately affected. So even just with COVID deaths alone, that's like 9 million people in our culture that are grieving, and we're not talking about it. So long answer, find comfort. Tackling these things is really difficult. And then who can support you as you start to untangle some of these stickier questions that you're going to have a really individual response to.
In Allison Prophet's podcast episode, we talked a little bit about this idea of, Western culture is really not well suited to, like, there's very much this bootstrap, the cowboy or cowgirl mentality. Like you must like bury your grief, restrain your feelings. And it serves us so poorly in a number of ways, but in particular in the workplace and in our creative endeavors. Whereas we see and know just empirically from what we've seen of art and culture that there is profound creativity to be found through healing and through experiencing grief and pain. And a lot of key comedians say, like, I write my best jokes when I am really upset. When I'm sad, I write my best jokes. And we know that this is true, but there's not really a guide, right, to connect the dots between the things of, like, no, this is a process. There's no checklist that you can just say, oh, I have 5 things on my checklist and now I'm happy again. It's very much a process. It's a path that is weaving through a forest. And I think it's astute to say that there's an element of care in that, beyond just like, oh, this thing happened. Yeah, this thing happened, but it's not just other people caring for you, it's you caring for you as this process evolves.
Yeah, self-compassion and self-care is super important. One of the workshops that I help lead, which is actually not going to be at this one, but is around, what is your natural way of showing up for people? When I went to a hospice group right after my dad had died, they shared, there's going to be different categories that people are showing up in. You've got your helpers, the people that will bring tissues and take out your trash and watch your kids. And you've got distractors, those who might not be able to be with you as emotionally present, but they'll take you to a movie or, make you laugh. Let's see, I don't want to screw these all up. And then there's the emotional processors, the people that can sit with you and cry and hold space. And then the last type is the type of person that you thought would show up and they don't. And I think, I know I can think of 4 or 5 people that I thought would be those who showed up and they didn't. And I just really encourage employers and organizations to not be that category of missed opportunity in caring for your people.
In the world of like HR and all the legalities and other things like that, there's some, I think, element of fear from a business owner or folks who are in the management to know what's appropriate to sort of lean into that category of grief, especially if you don't have a full-time dedicated HR and a legal team to sort of help you navigate those processes.
Yep.
But there are examples of folks out there doing it well and doing it right. We've seen, Dropout TV, and even locally, Allison alluded to a local company that had done it really well. And so we know that these paragons of virtue exist out there. How do we implement that in our own business? And is that what you're going to be covering in your workshop?
Yeah, that's a big question. So that's actually not where I'm headed in this workshop. And I too have those fears of, like, I'm not an HR person. I kind of shirk at giving advice in that regard because I'm not a legal advisor and I don't know the rules. But I think a lot of times what gets in the way is that fear of, how do I be a decent human being in the face of suffering? And earlier you were talking about really the power and the cathartic power of healing and artistic expression. And so what we will be covering is this idea of the phrase, there are no words. And I think a lot of times there really are not the perfect words to say in these situations. And from leaders' perspectives, I think you're really touching on, like, I don't know what to say. I don't want to get in trouble. I don't want to cross any boundaries. But I'm a writer, and in the face of grief, I have a lot of words. In fact, I've spent 10 years capturing my grief experiences on the internet for people to read. And so what I will be doing is helping break down some of those stigmas and stereotypes, and we'll start with simple sentence construction when we think about our own disruptive life experiences. That sucks. Like, those are 2 words. Wow, this must be really hard. What is that, 6? I'm so sorry you're having to deal with that. So for me, it's really helping people go back to the basics around, how do you want to be as a human when you're showing up, knowing that people are performing or experiencing less than ideal situations. And I really believe too, like grief is a great equalizer. At some point, we're all going to experience it. And I remember early on in my grief story, I remember just being furious at other people, like, just you wait, you little, like this is coming for you too. And that's not a posture that's very productive or helpful, but I think that's a really powerful space to delve into. So we'll be looking in a more productive space in the workshop in service of community care, helping people realize that actually our words are very similar when we're trying to come up with these ways to grapple with these experiences. And if we can find those similar threads to connect to our common humanity, there's a lot of power there, rather than the things that help us distance or turn away. And I always like to say, this is a Monica Warline quote, compassion requires customization. And so my advice for organizations is, let's really look at how we can create custom plans that will serve you in your unique situation, rather than do these three things and you're all going to be okay.
A lot of what you have described is just being a good human. I think that we kind of struggle with that in terms of how do we connect well to each other, especially like post-COVID. Everybody's kind of like messaging. We didn't really have that face-to-face contact, and maybe it's like lost your sense of ability to read a room. But I also think that these types of exercises, these types of workshops, where you can we have difficult conversations. And Gabe Dorita actually did this at a workshop last year, but in terms of like asking for different things in negotiations, and there was power dynamic things. And so we think about it often in terms of how can this thing serve me? How can this skill serve me? But we also spend a lot of time feeling guilty about maybe not being there like we should for our friends, or, oh, I should have sent this text message, or I didn't send a birthday card, or I didn't, whatever it is. As business owners or as creatives or individuals, that self-compassion for like letting those things go, but also being able to show up in ways that are like, oh, 2 words, 6 words. You sent a little text message that said, hey, I'm thinking about this because I know that this is your, the day that something bad happened to you. It's an anniversary and I want to make sure that you're okay. Those things matter. And that freedom from the guilt that sits on your shoulders is one of those, you talked about the multiplier earlier. It doesn't even have to be somebody's direct loss. It's that loss is that impact is felt throughout the community of people around that person. And so, yeah, it's very much like, how do we leverage this in a way and incorporate this into our day to day so that we're mindful about it, and also freeing ourselves up from, oh, shoot, I didn't do that. I need to think about this. It's going to sit on my to-do list forever, because we have those tasks that just sit there, and they're just, and they don't ever get off of our to-do list. And then suddenly a month has passed, 2 months have passed, and you have missed your opportunity.
Yeah. And I will say, it's never too late to say, wow, I remember your anniversary and I'm sorry I missed it. I'm thinking of you today. So there's lots of layers. And I think too, like I said, we're each going to have different comfortability with what we want as support. Like, some people really want to be at work. Some people really need the time off. Some people really want a space to process. And some people are like, oh, I have emotions. Like, I'd prefer not to do that with you. Thank you. So one of the questions that I like to just provide some thinking, both for the employer and the leader, is support to you is like what? I am going to have very different assumptions and needs about what it feels to be cared for, and getting clear on where that is different, and then what can I do in that space. A lot of times people will say, how can I help? And I think that is the least helpful question, because if people already knew, they'd probably ask you. And if they say, well, I need 4 weeks off, and you can't do that, all of a sudden you've also dug yourself into a hole. So instead, shifting it to, these are 3 ways that I can help. Which of those feels supported, or supportive rather? That's very different than, tell me what I can do. Oh shit, I can't do that.
Yeah.
There you go. There's your first swear word. But I think it's powerful. Yeah.
Was as I tell my children, sometimes swear words are the only appropriate words.
Yeah,
So
when we're talking about finding
they
those
have
words.
power.
And I think there's some heaviness to this topic. And it doesn't need to not be heavy, but I think we can also shine light on it. It doesn't have to be dark.
Tell me about this is as your business, as a business person, you experienced grief. You documented this process for 10 years. And you shared that in public. What does your business look like? What does your day-to-day look like? What do you do in your day-to-day business? And how do you incorporate these practices for yourself?
Yeah, so I'm very much in creator mode as I'm thinking about how can I be of service. I have a full-time job here in the community working with leaders and teams. And I'm also working on growing my coaching base for people who are looking for support as they're in transition. So like many of you, I wear a lot of different hats and get to play a lot of different roles in the community. So the day-to-day is always a juggle of passion and purpose, and then figuring out how do you get those bills paid. But I think for me, there's also just this strong curiosity of figuring out where are people getting stuck and how can we help them, or how can I help them uncover what they might already know to be true. So that's what I strive to do in coaching. But yeah, wearing a lot of different hats. And what I really want to move towards is experiencing opportunities for leaders to have aha moments in service of how they're caring for their teams.
When implementing this in a small business, or a even a larger size business, if they don't have an HR person, what are some of the first steps to evaluate for this? How would you help a business get unstuck? Does it have to wait until a moment of grief is experienced, or can it be something that's proactively planned?
I would really hope that it's proactively planned, because I think um, if you're working with humans, people are going to have disruptions happen in their lives. So I think you're a step ahead if you're proactively planning, and it's not contingency crisis planning. It's more about how do we want to be in service of the people that we're working with. I also really encourage people to start with what's working well already. It's very easy to feel overwhelmed, like you've already got a ton on your plate, and a lot of times the yeah but that I will hear is like, I don't have time to think about how to care for so and so. And it's not explicitly said like that, but the intention is not to have overwhelm around this, but rather, where are you already awesome? Like, what can you um, highlight or make easier or systematize? Sometimes that's looking at audits of your policies. Sometimes that's looking at create creative teams. Like I was talking to one organization and they have a care team that when people have an incident happen, they pool together and like even just give a gift card, or some of those small things that you're like, will that really make a difference? I believe it does. Um, and then another book that I really recommend, and this is again Monica Warline, she has a book called It's Awakening Compassion at Work. And she goes through the systems and roles and structures that organizations are built around to operationalize compassion, and make it easier for people to show up and have care for one another. So I could go again, like it depends on what dial you're trying to turn. Also, bereavement policies are super outdated. Take a look at like what you're actually okay with. Sometimes there's language around like must be kin, or you really only get 2 days. Option B is another great resource. It's Sheryl Sandberg's organization, but they have a lot of ideas on language to use with perhaps more HR specialty than I have around what are some of the things that people struggle with. I know when my dad died, I think I was given a week, and I worked for a small company at the time, and I didn't even know what the like bereavement policy was. And I was a new employee. It was super awkward to try to have to ask and navigate. So clear is kind, and expansion is kind, and customization is kind.
We've talked a little bit about what your workshop is. We've talked a little bit about what your workshop isn't. Let's talk about who you want in the room. Who are you hoping shows up? If what the issue that you're hoping to help them with, and they can raise their hand and say like, "Oh, that's me. I'm struggling with that." Who do you want in the room?
Yeah. Curious and caring people are welcome. really those who are wondering or have a list of like, yeah, that sounds great, but here's where I'm feeling stuck. And I always welcome a little bit of a dark sense of humor. I think that it's important to have some levity in these topics. And if we take ourselves too seriously, we get really stuck in the what could go wrong. So whether you are an individual with a story trying to figure out how do I get support and normalize what my grief journey is, or you're a leader trying to figure out what exactly can I offer when people are struggling, there's a wide spectrum, but in the description, I think I used the word wordplay. And I remember when I first piloted the workshop, someone said, I feel really uncomfortable with this idea of playing with my grief. Like it is painful and it is personal, and I do not want to be told to play with it. And I said, thank you so much. I hadn't thought of it that way. And I hope that there's some invitation for us to hold ourselves with tenderness as we look at these difficult topics. And with that, it gave her some more permission to look at it in a different way about what she was talking about. So people who are willing to hold the complexities and not need a 3-step plan are probably going to do better and have more fun than those who just want an answer.
Yeah, those psychological walls come in a lot of different forms. And I think also as leaders, we struggle with the idea of we are naturally centering ourselves in that we are leaders. And so like, I'm going to extend this compassion to you. And this is because I'm expected to do this thing. And it can be simultaneously draining and performative at the same time.
Oh, yeah, thanks for naming that.
Yeah, and you can't like it's so as a leader, you have this very difficult pathway to navigate that you are then the cost of that externality is then being paid by the person who's grieving, and it's just this is a mess. So I think that that's maybe why a lot of leaders like opt out of this. And if you're kind of stuck in that psychological space of I want to be there for my people, I don't want to center myself in this grief. But I want to be, in orbit with you as you're experiencing with these things and helping you, in ways that are natural and make sense. That sounds like a myriad of people that I know that have, I didn't know how to respond to this. I don't know what to say. And because, leaders talk amongst themselves, like this is a common thing. So I think you're hinting at something that's really an interesting shift in thought processes for leaders in not just business, but in our community at large. And I hope it sticks.
Yeah, thanks. Thanks for the opportunity.
Where can we find out more about you and your business? What things of yours do you want to highlight that you want us to check out and read?
Yeah, absolutely. So more about me and my journey is on my website. It's just katiehuey.com. On that website is also a link to my blog, which is called 52 Beautiful Things. So that's the 10-year account that I was talking about, but I've been writing each week trying to find some good in the world. It started out as a weekly blog back in 2014, and then I had a baby and it has trickled off. So there's still a lot there. It's just not coming out in the same weekly cadence. I'm also on LinkedIn and would love for you to follow along on Instagram, also on 52 Beautiful Things, and look forward to talking to you in real life. I am an introvert and I get a little nervous holding these spaces too, but I think really there's power in saying like, I'm not sure, I'm not perfect, but let's walk through this together. And that's what I was hearing you highlight too. So yeah, let's find some words together and look forward to the connection.
Katie, thank you for being here with us, and we'll see you next time.
Yeah, my pleasure. See you all in March.
Hey, thanks for listening. I'm Nick Armstrong, and this is a Founded in FoCo podcast. For more great interviews like this one, join us at foundedinfoco.com.